chromatic chimera heads and ahoy. We're coming at you live with our next event in CouchCon. Joining me today is Chris, known as Touch of Tiefling on Twitter, and you probably have seen him a lot around here. And we're going to be talking about GMing on stream today, because stuff like that, it actually does change up the game. And Chris and I were kind of talking about it, and we feel like no one really talks about that, because either people are like, they want to seem like, oh, I've been doing this a while, I know what I'm doing, like I'm cool like that, or they've been doing it for so long that they kind of forgot. Or some people just might not want more GMs on stream, but Chris and I don't think that way.
No, we don't care. So we were just kind of talking about it and filling a panel slot like this and kind of just talking about what changes, like Alex said. We've been very introspective about our DMing as we started this channel, and we just feel like that there's a lot of different things. So we're just kind of here to talk about that a little bit. We're also going to be taking questions, so anybody in the Twitch chat, go ahead and plop your questions in, and we'll probably get to them towards the end when we run out of shit to talk about. So
that's usually when people start fielding questions.
Yep.
And we did get some questions from Twitter. We put a poll out earlier in the week, so we'll be answering those as well. So those of you who ask questions on Twitter, if you're here, hello, and to everyone else, hello. And don't forget that during this, please consider donating to our Tiltify, because Doctors Without Borders, that's who we're doing the stream for. We've already raised $630. We've reached the second goal of 500. Let's get ourselves to that third goal of 1,000.
All right, we just want to dive right into this.
Let's get into this.
All right, first bullet point, we're going to talk about what the community around D&D wants to see. So kind of what I mean by that is what the Twitter community and the Twitch community kind of want to see in a stream to keep people entertained. Because I know from my own personal experience, when I used to run, beer and pretzels games for my friends, they would go along with any plot that I wanted them to. But let's just talk about kind of how that changes when we have an audience to think about as well.
Yeah. And I don't know, we kind of came to the conclusion of what the community wanted after doing this for about a year now. We've noticed like what people are looking for, what are they excited about when we go and watch our friends stream and other channels that we know stream. Like, what are people looking for? So go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, okay. So we wanted to talk about balancing RP time and combat. As much as Chris loves combat and crunchy number systems, I think that the community at large really likes role playing, and I think that both of our games do a really good job of incorporating that inter-party roleplay that is like so desired by people. That's all they want to see, especially Steam Spell. Just as an example, I feel like pretty much every session is filled with mostly us role-playing and then a very like narrative dynamic combat. And that's right up the alley, I think.
Yeah, well, the community, it's weird because when people talk about the games they've been watching, Critical Role obviously is going to get thrown around in this conversation a few times.
Sure.
People don't talk about I don't hear people talk about the super memorable fights from Critical Role. I'm sure they're there. I just don't really see those conversations. The conversations I see is more of the character stories, the character development, and the character interaction. That's what more people on the, at least on Twitter that I've seen, and in the greater internet community, is more looking for those meaningful role-playing scenes. So how I usually would do it, and like Chris brought up in Steam Spell, is I kind of just let the characters just take the scene, do what they want to do, have meaningful role play when necessary. And I have maybe a session in combat every other session, because although D&D is set up to be like small encounter, that way of playing doesn't suit itself well to actual play.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that when you do have, this kind of leads into the next point a little bit, is when you do have these combats, I try to limit like random encounters a lot when I'm DMing on stream. Me and Alex played in a game before we started Chromatic Chimera together, and pretty much 3-4 times a session he would hear me say, okay, who wants to roll me a D100 for a random encounter, and we would just riff off of each other and go with that. I think I've done it maybe twice on stream since we started, just because we need to get to so many things, and honestly, like, combat can get a little boring to watch when there's not like a big narrative weight to it. We've all killed hundreds of orcs at this point in our D&D career, and a lot of the time orcs aren't really the big bad narrative weight that we want. So for example, right now I just dropped my party in Agora's Bells into a big coliseum with a bunch of vampire spawn that they've had hunches that the big bad guys are vampires for in-game months now. So
Yeah.
I think you really got to make sure that the narrative is driven home as well.
Yeah, like when it comes to combats, I've seen a lot of really good talks about like designing good encounters, and I think good encounter design is the way to make your combats fun on stream to watch. As Chris said, narrative weight. As long as you can answer why is this happening, why is this combat happening, you have a good combat on your hands. And also encourage roleplay in combat is my thing. Combat can be a great way to show a lot of stuff about your characters, and people look at it more mechanically, but you try and encourage that thinking in character. Describe like how the monster's acting. Like an animal is going to not act the same way as like a sentient humanoid creature is going to. Like have like if they're fighting intelligent enemies that are basically humans, or any of like what a player character could be, have them like taunt the characters, have them try and get some like call out to your players and see if they'll respond to that.
Another thing I really like to do, and this is good advice for off-stream games as well, obviously, but more so in game. I really like descriptive combat, and I know not all players are comfortable describing their actions in combat. So I, as the DM, often describe what happens. Not every time, not every attack, but most of the big ones. Maybe if somebody passes a saving throw, I don't describe that. But if the fighter goes up and gets 3 natural 20s on somebody, I'm going to describe that, obviously. So, and I feel like my offline or off-stream experience, I didn't really do that as much because everyone had it in their head, like what it looks like, and they all had that own image. But when you have like when you have an audience watching, maybe they're not thinking of what's going on in like the player's head. So it's fun to describe that for them too, so they're more part of the action as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's really easy to fall into the trap of stopping being descriptive. I'll catch myself doing that as well, because sometimes what happens, this happens a lot when I'm playing GMing or playing in games on stream compared to my home games, is I find myself trying to get through combat quickly because, as we said, audience doesn't want to watch combat. Actually, I'm pulling from my own personal thoughts as well. When I'm watching actual plays personally, oftentimes combat's not the most exciting thing for me unless it's a very well-designed, dynamic encounter. If it's just that the characters are on a flat square fighting monsters in a grassy field, but I've seen that 100 times. So the thing is, it's just, you don't want to get caught up in trying to get through combat as soon as possible. You should try and remain descriptive, because like like you were saying, Chris, like even like last night in Curse of Booty Island, like you mean the GM's not going to describe the druid who wild shaped into a T-Rex grabbing the Kraken out of the water? Like describe that, because it's cool and you can make it exciting for people. And it can still have that narrative feel that you get outside of combat then.
Yeah, sometimes I'll rewatch our Steam Spell or Agora's Bells VODs on YouTube and stuff, and I normally, even my own combats that I like stakingly crafted, I skip right over them and go to the role-playing stuff. So even my own games and my own combats, I'm still not interested in watching. So I think that like that is very indicative of what the audience at large wants to see. If I don't even want to watch my own creative encounter, like, so I try to keep it fast-paced and moving.
All right, we got a question from the fictional historian. Clay runs our Sunday Heavy Mecha Lancer RPG. How do you go about making dynamic encounters? And honestly, I think that I was eventually wanting to bring it up. If you're gonna, like, try and have a good grasp of the system, because that's how you're going to be able to design dynamic encounters. You need to not only know the ins and outs of the system, you need to know how to break the system. Because that's how I start making my most dynamic encounters, is when you start thinking outside of the box of just that grid and stuff. Like with the Kraken fight, placed cannons around the ship the players could use. The Krakens wasn't the only other enemy in that fight. There was also the Ghost Pirates. So you have two different you kind of have two mini battles going on in one larger battle. Again, just having a proficiency and a grasp and an understanding of the system, you'll be able to really design fun encounters.
Another thing that, like, kind of going along with that is, since we're kind of relegated to like Roll20 or Fantasy Grounds while we play online because we're not all in the same city, another thing is that I really miss from in-person games is like different elevations.
Yeah.
So I really like to like a few fights ago when you guys were raiding the Tomb of the Five Royals, I had King Jackson, Adrian, Abby, and Alex's characters. They fell through like a pit, and they were on like a whole different plane than the rest of the party fighting. And I think that specifically can make it a lot of fun when, you know, your only healer is trapped 20 feet below you and the rest of the party is dealing with this poisonous cloud. So just even elevation is like a real game changer.
Adding that third dimension to any battle, even if the enemy can just fly, or like with the ocean, there are many different ways you can add a third dimension. I agree with Chris, adding additional dimensions to the fight, adding these little layers that kind of go on. So you've got, like, let's say your encounter's a cake, right? The encounter's like the cake itself, but then like third dimension might be your first layer of frosting. Interesting mechanics becomes the next thing. I find that also makes for more dynamic encounters, is when you have interesting mechanics, and that's why a good understanding of the system is important to try and design these encounters. And I find it's more fun when you have like a monster, let's compare like a Froghemoth versus something of a similar level, a giant, right? The big difference here is that the Froghemoth, like, they can grapple players, they can swallow them, they have an interesting lightning weakness that they have to them, and that makes it so much more interesting, especially when like players can find ways to exploit weaknesses or vulnerabilities. And another really good way to just make for good dynamic encounters is just kind of like let players run with their wild ideas, right, Chris?
Yeah, and I mean that kind of brings us to Sam's question in chat, is like any tips for ensuring each PC has a good chance to shine in combat. I tend to never say, especially in streamed games, like I never want to say like, no, you can't do that. So that's a general DM tip. But I think the biggest thing for me is some DMs will tell you not to do this, but I definitely take into consideration everyone's abilities before I design an encounter.
Yeah.
Like not so much to plan against them, but actually to plan for them. Like there was an encounter recently with well, not recently, but there was a Rakshasa on the top of a tower that I ran. Everyone who's in the game watching knows the encounter quite well. And I know Alex's character, King Jax, is a Storm Cleric, and, he loved to use Call Lightning. So I actually left the dome, or the top of the tower, open to the sky on purpose, and it was a stormy day. So just, like, having things like that where it was very intentional on my part to let his character shine from that. So just little things like that, knowing your abilities, and I think that's important to go do your research and read the classes and know exactly what they can do.
Agreed. And like, to make sure different characters can shine in different moments, that's why I think making these dynamic encounters is really important, because if you have different elements to a fight, for example, like last night's Curse of Booty Island, during that the party was fighting against a giant Kraken creature trying to basically pull people off the ship and eat them, and they also had to deal with like this ghost crew, this undead crew of pirates that had climbed onto the ship. So like, you have the fighter who is just outputting damage the whole time and is shining from that, and meanwhile the druid is polymorphed into a T-Rex battling the Kraken. So like, those two different characters are shining in combat, but in very different ways at this moment. and you know, we had the artificer get eaten, even though that's a bad thing. He's like, I'm gonna blow it up from the inside. You know, like,
I think
encouraging players to do that thing. If they're like, when they're like, I don't know if this is gonna work, encourage them to do that.
And I think, like, I know metagaming is bad, but at this point, most of us know, like, what's a good example? Like, skeletons are weak to bludgeoning damage or something like that. So even if, like, you have, like, a player who you know knows that, and they use a bludgeoning weapon, give them a bunch of skeletons to mess with. Like, you know, play to their strengths. Let them use these vulnerabilities on the monsters, even if it hurts your game plan a little bit.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't know. You brought up metagaming, and like I've seen a lot of discussion, and I think there's actually different there's different facets to metagaming. There is like classical metagaming, which is bad, but there's good examples of good metagaming, like Chris is saying. You know, knowing what your players are capable of. Like,
yeah,
I'm not gonna throw something at my party that they really have no answer to. You know, not gonna, if they're all clerics, I might not necessarily throw them in a thing with a celestial or something like that.
Yeah. We want to take Cryocore's question now?
Yeah, sure. How do you make the size scale of enemies impactful during combat? I think this is a kind of in reference to those layers we were talking about.
Yeah. So for me, I tend to just use giant ass monsters. Quite simple. Yeah. Like I love the impact of, again, I'll pull from Agora's Bells recently. There was a fight in a big tomb where this giant, like, Skein Witch, we called her, was draped over the bell herself. So I like to use the environment of the map to actually make the enemy feel more imposing, if that makes sense. She was very clearly over a mythical object that was coveted and could unleash untold disaster upon the world, and so her size almost didn't matter. It was that the importance of what she's doing. So it's almost the intent of the monster rather than like the size, if that makes sense.
I mean, this is where I might disagree with you, because this is something I allow. If you've got a big monster, let your players climb it.
Oh yeah, no, I'm all for that. Yeah,
like that's one way. Just let them climb it. Have the monster have like these grappling abilities, or they can deal like just big boo-foo. Make your big monsters feel big.
Yeah. I mean, I'm all about huge monsters. I mean, you guys have fought dragons in Agora's Bells and inside of a small cave, but I like to almost like use juxtaposition with the environment and the monster. So you fought Marsaurus, the giant brass dragon, inside of his tiny little cave. So you were stuck in this cave, you know, thousands of feet in the air, and you had nowhere to go, basically, and he could fly. So you guys were super creative. All the PCs shined in that. You know, you flooded the cave, you shattered it. So just juxtaposing like the environment and the monster is something that I always do in my fights.
Just to move forward here, because you know we've got quite a few things to talk about still.
Yeah, let's do it.
So you know, I see there was a question about safety tools. That's a big topic this week, due to certain things that happened. So safety tools, of course, are very important, even when you're not running a game on stream. The thing is, I'll even admit I didn't always use them because I didn't know they were a thing. Like,
sure.
Play with the people I used to play with, I knew very well. They were all close friends. This was before I joined the greater community. We kind of all had the lines and stuff we knew. Like, you know, we knew where the line was drawn already. But when you do go to stream, it is important to use safety tools and to have them there, not only for your players and yourself, but also for your audience.
Go ahead, sorry.
Oh no, go ahead. It's fine.
I was just gonna talk about mine. Like, I use a really simple system. I just use yellow card and red card, and my Discord DMs are open every time we stream. Yellow card basically just means I'm good at the level it's at, but don't go any further, essentially. And red card means absolutely stop right now. It's super simple, but even just letting your players know that that is happening in a stream game, I think a lot of the tension comes from maybe players kind of feel intimidated that an audience is watching and they don't want to steer the plot away from where the GM is leading them. But if it's making you uncomfortable, like, obviously let your DM know. Even in front of the audience, it's worth your like safety over you know, the audience's views, you know.
Yeah, and like the thing, and for your audience, it's really easy. Just content warnings if you're gonna have some stuff that you know is going to possibly be triggering or could cause a problem for someone. It's super simple. You can set up a bot to drop them in every like 5 minutes. You can put it in like your description, mention them. I've even had it where I just flat out say it before the thing comes up, like, "Hey, this is the body horror is gonna be a thing coming up. Like, if you don't like gore, stop listening, like get out of this now." And it's just, and the other thing that I think I do something like Chris, where I'm like, "Hey, my DMs are open. If you don't want to say it, you can just say it out loud if you want. My DMs are open."
Sure.
Just like, you can just, I kind of use a modified, like a for variation of the X card, where it's like, "Hey, Alex, let's not push this too far," or also just like, "Hey, let's cut it there." And most of the time, I can catch it before it even like gets to where you can usually catch it. Like, I've had a few things where it's like someone says something like, all right, we're gonna just stop right there. And
yeah, that's kind of what Sam was just saying in chat. They said sometimes it's like a trauma response to freeze, and yeah, I completely agree with that, obviously. And it's one of those things where you can also communicate after the game. So just making and reading the room while the game is happening. By this point, I'd like to think that most of the players, like, I can read pretty well in our we've played 30 sessions together. Like, I feel like if I could read the room and just know where I'm steering the game is problematic, then you just stop it there before your players even have to use the yellow card.
And the other thing is just quite simply, here are my two other secrets. Session 0, you're gonna lay it all out there. Just say, here's what I plan on having in this campaign. This is what might come up. This is what might be in the game. Just, are you okay with this? And players can say yes or no. Or you can also just be like, I also ask, like, hey, what are you not okay with?
Yeah, and you do that outside of Session 0 too. Like, when Beamer just said in chat, like, when we fought the dragon dude, the mutated individual, you put a warning in chat. We talked about it for weeks beforehand. So
and the other thing, as you're saying, communication's my other secret, though. I talk to my players, like, because sometimes what happens is like, I've had this happen to myself personally, before I started streaming, where it's like, something happened in game and I said, like, no, nothing really makes me uncomfortable. And then after it happened and I thought about it, I was like, no, I was uncomfortable. And like, it's okay to change your mind, and that's why I maintain an open line of communication. It's really important, because that way I can still check in with my players, see how they're doing. Hey, I know you're like not into gore as much. Were you okay with that? Or a really big example is in Steam Spell, Sam plays Mouse, who is disabled, and has Sam's conditions. And it's a fine line you walk, because here's Sam handing me basically their life experience, like something they want to explore, and it's very vulnerable. And it's like a little baby mouse Sam's put into my hand that I have to take care of, right? And it's really easy to not realize, like, to mess that up. Even like, you might not be a jerk, but there's stuff you might not realize, like, oh wait, shit, that's and like, I realized, like, the enemy faction were very much basically Nazi scientists, and I never realized it when I was writing everything. And then I realized it, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go check in with my players really quick.
Yeah.
And I was like,
and you did that instantly, so
Yeah, and it's like, hey, like, I just had this realization. You gonna be okay with that? And also, like, fuck your spoilers. Who gives a shit? If you know something's gonna come up that might require a lot of emotional energy and a lot of resolve, let them know what's coming up. Like, let them know that big character thing's gonna come up. Hey, Mouse, you're gonna run into your estranged brother who tried to kill you this session.
Yeah, and that kind of is like what our next big bullet point is, kind of talking about what your players want as well. Because obviously, table chemistry, me and Alex have been talking about that privately a lot lately. And table chemistry, we think, is like the number one indicator for how a stream is making
It's
the
what I look
audience
for.
feel. Yeah, it is, and I feel like both of our games now have great table chemistry.
Yes.
And that's based on a lot of the groundwork that you have done, and checking in all the time with the players.
Hmm.
I haven't been great about it lately, but usually I try to do at least like a monthly check in with my players and be like, hey, how do you feel about your character, their direction, where do you want to head with them? Recently, Abby, who plays Adrian on Agora's Bells, reached out to me, and we kind of talked about how Adrian wants to progress with her adopted child that she has. We kind of talked about that for a little bit. So just making sure that your players are also heading in a direction they want to take their character, because it would have been very easy. We'll use the mouse example again for Sam to say like, I'm not comfortable with that direction. So even things like that are helpful with safety tools. Just
Yeah.
these monthly check-ins, even if they're not necessarily about the safety, that can be when safety can come up as well.
Yeah, and I think another good way is you play with them before you bring them on your stream. Like,
Yeah.
we played with most of our players ahead of time.
Yeah, pretty much everybody. Yeah.
Yeah, we knew everyone before we did this. Like,
Mhm.
I know doing open casting calls can be cool. It's fun. Gets a lot of hype built for your game.
Mhm.
But the best way to have that table chemistry from day one is to just play with people you know. Play with people you're comfortable with. That's a
Yeah.
big thing, is playing with people you are comfortable with. Because, like, even when I'm playing with strangers, sometimes I'm like, I'm not as like in the
No.
game as much. You're more reserved, and
Yeah.
you don't want that. It's for that RP experience.
Well, yeah. I mean, for example, like we have session 0 of our new City of Mist campaign right after this that I'm running, and as I pretty much did an open casting call in our Discord, and we got some great individuals, but it also helps that like I'm playing with Alex and Sam again, who I've played with for years at this point, and so it just kind of, even as a GM, it kind of helps you feel more comfortable at the table too, to explore different topics that might be difficult to explore sometimes.
Yeah, and like, that's going back to you talking about the goals. Like, that's something that I started doing when I started running games online, was like kind of like laying out, okay, what do I want to accomplish this session? And it could be just in general for the campaign plot. It could be a specific character thing. You feel like a character needs spotlight. Let's get a goal in there.
Yeah.
And then I'll put like some notes in saying, okay, this is where they're at. Here's like, I know it's video gamey, but saying here's what their quest is. Because like the Star Touch from Steam Spell, that party, they'll rack up multiple things that they're looking into at a time. And they might not go and touch on one of the things for a while. So I need to keep reminding myself, hey, like that could come up at any moment. I find that helps a lot too, just in general. And I think a lot of these practices that you use for running online games can make your games at home better.
I think, yeah, we're kind of relating it to streaming again as well, is when I used to run offline games, I didn't have, maybe this is just my fault failings as a DM, but maybe somebody out there needs to hear it. I didn't have like, I guess what I would call side plots for every character. Like, how King Jax is very connected to his deity.
Yeah.
I didn't really have that for my players before I started like streaming and making these narrative games. It was very much like, okay, we're a party of misfits, let's go kill the dragon. Now that we're on stream, I try to bring that in. So,
yeah,
maybe there's one audience member that we have that is just a total King Jax stan and doesn't care about my game at all, but just loves King Jax. So I try to give them that cool interaction for King Jax to shine too. So
yeah, and I mean, I see that too. People are big fans of some of the characters we have. Like, I'm just thinking about Steam Spell. Like, we got a lot of Crew Kazel and Mouse and Nettle fans out there, right? And like, but then there's other people who like love Roz and Gray, and it's that's what people get into as characters. Like, think about the shows you like, think about the movies and that's something I started doing a lot of when I started streaming, was actually pulling from this other media to make it cooler. Like, okay, what's this little trick they do in the TV show? Like, what's this little thing you do? And you realize, I was like, oh, I like this show because the characters, like Tiger King, it's memorable because Joe Exotic, not because it's just the concept, but just Joe Exotic is what makes it memorable.
Right. And I think that's a great point, is when you watch shows like, what's a good example? What's a popular show? Like The Walking Dead.
Yeah.
They have that little 5-minute like solo character where they're staring out the window contemplatively, and we kind of do that too. Like, for another example is Sam's character in Agora's Bells is named Blossom, and she has a new relationship with a warlock patron who is super creepy, and every like 3 sessions or so I'll be like, okay, we haven't had a lot of Blossom, let's give her and Nock like a 5-minute convo, and I think like you just said, that does kind of establish the same relationship as like a a talking head for a character in a Walking Dead or something like that.
Yeah. So, and the thing I've noticed a lot with these stream games, and I think it's because it attracts a certain player type, because Chris, you were talking about like how you used to run a lot of combat heavy classic D&D, go loot the room, collect reward, on level up onto the next quest. We don't see a lot of that. People might enjoy mechanics, but a lot of people when they play in streams, and it's because of what the audience wants, it's what players want, they want those deep characters, they want the deep RP, and letting your characters have a hand in campaign trajectory and giving them a little more of a big role in like the setting and stuff. Like when I had people like I had Abby come up with some like halfling culture stuff because she was playing a halfling, or like I had Chris like message me like, hey, let's talk about White Dragonborn. And it's like, well, what do you think? What do you want the culture to be like? You're the one playing this character, right? Like,
well, I think another example is when we started this idea for Chromatic Chimera and we were making each other's characters, you pretty much made up Bu and Yang. Like I had the name and his description, but then you were like, oh, I want him to be my best friend. I want to have done this, like I want to have saved his life at one point, and we just ran from it there. And I think related to streaming, that can really help the players shine, and that's what the audience wants to see, in my opinion. So and like it was just that idea that you had of like this god of giants, and like then when I came to you and said, hey, you want a Yeti race, because you mentioned that to me, like, oh, I want a Yeti race, but I don't know what. I'm like, just use furbolgs. Furbolgs are already kind of fluffy and they're nature loving and whatnot, so we ran with that. Chris was like, yeah, let's run with that. And then like that's when I started getting those ideas, like, oh, my cleric knew his god, because I wanted to play a really interesting twist on the cleric. And I came to Chris and I said, how about we do this? Let's make him, he's known his god before his god reached deity status. He saved his god's life at some point. Imagine the crisis of faith this would cause him at certain points in his life. And like, you want to look for that stuff, because it's like, you might not think of that as a DM, but your player's thinking this and wants to run with this. And that's the thing. It's like, you're not usually you're thinking, okay, one person kind of comes up with a story for like what you see on TV and in the movies. Like one person's the director. Do not take that approach to your actual plays. Do not take that approach to your home games. Yeah, and I think that does kind of relate just full circle to, the more fun the players are having, the more table chemistry we'll have, and the more people will enjoy watching you play. You can tell. if I'm running an example from my old game, I gave them a very clear, there's a MacGuffin, it's broken into 5 pieces, go find it. And they didn't have backgrounds, they didn't have stories, they didn't have backstories. I never tied anything in, and it probably would not have been a fun game to watch. Not that anybody was, but I think that we've created one that is more fun to watch. It's important to give your players what they want. I mean, I almost played in a game that like if you end up with this tyrant of a GM, your players are gonna be like, but I wanted to do this with my character. That's not what I wanted. And like, no, don't take that approach. Yeah, you're trying to tell a good story, but a good story will come. And here's the thing with D&D. You don't need like these huge groundbreaking stories. You don't need to pull like some Memento shit. You don't need a freaking Academy Award winning this deep deep thing. Like, if you're having fun, that's what people want to see. They want to see people having fun. Some people, and you'll find an audience for the kind of game you're running is the thing. You will find a group of like people out there who are like, I want to just go watch people bonk goblins in the head. I'll go find a stream for it. The audience will come to you. Yeah, and I think this is a decent segue into like, this isn't written on our sheet, but so allow me to go off road. But making villains for a streamed game as well, I think is an interesting thing, because for my offline games that I used to run, we had villains, sure, but it was just like, here's a world-ending dragon, like, which is kind of what Agora is, like, go kill her, go. But now I try to make these characters, for example, like Sam we'll use Sam again because they're in the chat. they put a a home run ball on a tee for me, and
Yeah.
with their character's aunt,
You
and
know what?
I turned her into a Rakshasa. So
Sam did the same thing for
Yeah,
me when she
I know.
handed her brother
Yeah.
Jade on a plate.
they're so kind.
And you're if your players like do that, connect your story to the players.
Mhm.
Like when Lucy came to me and said, "I want to be a byproduct of biomancer experimentation."
Mhm.
Now for a year, the biomancers, like Dr. Branson's this looming villain the party's never met, but they hate him.
Yeah.
They hate him, and that's what like Chris is saying here is. You got to get a good villain in there too, because like
Mhm.
even in the chat, they're all like, "Fuck Jade, fuck Dr. Branson." Like it's
Mhm.
there, and like when your players are latching onto it, that energy gets spread to the audience, and
Mhm.
that's the thing. When you can focus on your players like that and tell the story that they want to tell and that you want to tell at the same time, it's like, whoa. Like I had the basic idea. I wanted that mutant dragon fight to happen in the Spire, but then like due to the other stuff with the players and stuff, it made me add things to it, change some stuff around, and
Yeah. And allow
Oh.
me to give the audience some advice that you once gave me on
All right,
villain
let's hear
making.
it.
So we were talking about Marvel movies when Endgame came out because we're nerds, and we were talking about how good of a villain Thanos is and things like that. And Alex, said to me, well, the problem with making a Thanos-style villain in D&D is that we don't get to see those like cutscenes of him on his own and what he's thinking. So, yes, make a good villain. Yes, make your party hate the villain, but you don't. You don't have to give them this huge motivation. Some motivation
Yeah.
is good, like Dr. Branson wants to advance, magic or science, from what I hear, right? So, like that's a great motivation, but we don't need the whole like 50-minute cutscene of Thanos like taking over the world, and
Yeah.
killing half of everyone, right? So I think that it's a fine line of balance with D&D villains. Is that I'd like to think that the Wrong Turns and Agora's Bells at this point hate Aunt Thunder, even though they don't know her motivations. So
Exactly.
it's just making that character or that all of your PCs are tied to in some way, and then they'll all fucking hate them without you having to do anything. So
And that's kind of like what I'm saying is like you have like honestly just take your favorite villain and just kind of add some other villains that you really like. I really like my villains that feel like they're doing the right thing, and you can almost kind of maybe in a sick twisted sense agree with them. I like those villains.
yeah,
It's hard to show it, but you got to find ways to show it. And you're not going to be able to do that 10-minute monologue. You're not going to be able to give them that scene where Thanos is like perfectly balanced.
sure, that's what I'm saying. Exactly, yeah.
You got to show that motivation through other stuff, handouts, they're the henchmen, the cronies, the
Yep.
lieutenants, the higher ranking. You start to learn, like, I think Dr. Branson was just like this looming villain at first, and then like people are like, oh, he originally like a lot of people joined him because he sold them on the idea that we're advancing medicine, like
Mhm.
actual medicine, and we're trying to help people, and people bought into that. That's
Right.
what. So like you don't have to. So it's like these again. It's adding those layers. Like yeah, you have the villain, but like they're not the only one with the personality. Like
Mhm.
give them some like memorable henchmen. And it
Yeah.
can happen out of nowhere. Like Danny Otterman, just the dude who wouldn't die.
Fuck Danny Honor. I killed his brother last night. Yeah, so anyways, it's just that's another little tip to making the game interesting for an audience. Like I said, before I started streaming, I had villains that my party would go and kill, and then afterwards they'd be like, why did we kill him? So just making that interesting villain. But let's keep
Yeah.
moving because we're
Just want to say though, you don't want the party to kill them and then ask, why did we do that?
exactly, yeah.
If they are asking why did we do that after an encounter or
Yeah.
after other than maybe they were confused about something or like they were questioning bad decisions they made, but if they're after they kill an enemy or after they get through a big combat, why did we do that?
Mhm.
Hopefully they're asking more like, why didn't we just do this
Yeah.
thing? But like if they have to ask in a narrative sense, why did we do that?
And another thing, you kind of mentioned like Critical Role, big fights earlier. I don't remember play by play what happened during all of those awesome fights that I watched. What I remember is like the how do you want to do this and the super dramatic
Mhm.
moment at the end, like the, I don't want to spoil it, but there's a scene where somebody gets revenge on the person that killed their mom, and I remember
Yeah.
exactly what he said after getting that final blow, and like you remember that dramatic moment, you don't remember the 50 minutes of fighting, right? So
Or even in Curse of Booty Island, you remember the T-Rex tackling the Kraken.
Yeah.
You don't remember the play-by-play. You're
Yeah.
like, oh yeah, Stones turned into a T-Rex and took on a Kraken head on. That's what you remember.
Yeah.
But yeah, we can move on to the next point. Beamer was asking about being a player. Let's touch on that a little bit. I think that's important to touch on.
So being a player, could you touch on the differences for being a player? Differences in general are, I guess I try to. Man, I don't know. Alex, you take it. Hold on.
I try harder.
Yeah.
I try harder. I do more with the voice. I try to make an interesting character, not only mechanically. I try to make them interesting in concept. It's almost to my detriment that I try too hard. Like, it's fine to be a human fighter. Who cares? You can be some boring human fighter who was a soldier. You can make an interesting story out of that. Or what you can do is you can take a concept and be like, okay, how can I put my own spin on this?
Yeah, Sam just said in chat, a sense of sharing the spotlight is important, and I completely agree. There's been sessions in Steam Spell where I'll message Alex after and be like, hey, like, sorry if I hogged the spotlight tonight. Like, I was just feeling it. And, you know, like, we all have those nights and that we want to be in the spotlight more than others. So I think that understanding that and sharing with your friends at the table is more important in a streamed game, because on an offline game, maybe someone is like the main, you know, the face of the party, right? And we just let them run with that because everyone's having a good time at the table. But an audience wants to know about every character. There's more quiet characters at the table, but that doesn't mean there's an audience member who isn't fully invested and intrigued in that character. So it's just sharing it. And a lot of things that I do as a player on stream is that I try to role play with at least like half the table in like a 1-on-1 or 2-on-2 scenario every time. So I think as a player, the main difference is just engaging your fellow players more and making it interesting for everyone instead of just you. Because I fall into that occasionally as well.
Yeah, and another thing is like, I agree. It's just, you have to learn to share. The thing is with D&D, it is a group's experience. It is not just one person's game. Everyone is taking time out of their day to do this. So make sure everyone gets to play. And the thing is everyone's comfortable with different levels of spotlight. Some people don't really want it. Sometimes they're not feeling it that day. That's fine. As long as everyone's on the same, you're communicating a lot more. Is like, there's a lot of more of that out of game communication, like where you're like, oh, hey, you know, I'm going to step back this week on the role play stuff. Someone else take the helm. And it's really important. And I try to do what Chris does. I try to make sure I interact with every character at least once a session.
Yeah, and even like the quiet ones, like and not necessarily the people are quiet, just the character they're playing is quiet. And we've had, like Alex said, we've had out of game discussions between our little cast about like, hey, like maybe, you know, we should open up your character more. We should talk about your character more this week because we haven't heard a lot from them. Yeah. And so even these meta discussions are helpful as being a player, and kind of opening up everyone at the table.
Yeah, and Sidney made a good point, is listening to what other characters are doing, being an active listener, and paying attention to the game. At the home, I don't care if my players kind of doze off and do whatever when someone else is doing something. That's whatever. It happens. But on stream, you need to be paying attention to what's going on, because then you want to make well-informed decisions, and you want to be encouraging. I try to encourage my fellow players to also role play. Is you don't want to. People love strong silent types. They love broody edgelords who don't want to talk to anyone. Everyone loves the character with all the secrets. Here's the thing, though. You gotta give a little. If I'm coming, there's nothing more frustrating than when I go up to a character and I'm like, let's role play. I'm gonna try and prod you, and it's just nope.
Yep.
Just no, I don't want to talk. No, I don't want to talk. No one want. Then what's gonna happen is like, I'm gonna stop trying to role play with you then.
Yeah, it's very interesting to be that character in my experience. It's not very interesting to watch. You know, so like the audience might love the strong silent type and they just want them to open up. So you gotta sometimes give what the audience wants in that regard.
Yeah. And I'm not saying spill all your secrets, but like after a bit, like everyone thinks it's really cool to have the big reveal. Right. And it's like, there's going to be a lot of big reveals in a D&D campaign. It's okay if you don't have this huge reveal with your backstory. You do want to give to your other players. And that's the thing is, the classic improv tips that I keep seeing in chat. Yes, and but, no, and. And as players, you want to keep encouraging each other. through that. That doesn't mean like just do whatever to try and get everyone in the role play. Like don't
Sure.
like if someone's like, oh, I'm gonna go punch him in the face, like but more
Yeah.
of like encouraging that role play between each other.
Okay, let's take some of the Twitter questions just to make
All
sure
right.
we get those in because I
Yes.
feel like that's important. So Ryan, one of our very own players in Steam Spell, he asks, does DMing a stream game lose any of the thrill of being a DM because you aren't in the same room with your players? Or do you still get the same kind or a different kind of satisfaction from it overall?
First of all, if you some groups do stream from their home, so you might not lose that satisfaction.
Right.
But we played remotely for a while, and it's at first I didn't care for it as much, but I've learned it's just as much fun.
Yeah, the thing I miss a lot is minis and
Yeah.
terrain. Like I'm such a sucker for making a cool map, and it does kind of stink to have like a 2D map, and we're all
Yeah.
looking down at it together.
And-
So I lose that thrill a little bit, but I found thrills in other ways of like
Mhm.
there's a more engaging role play. I feel like just from my experience, and
Yeah, and what I do to help mitigate that is have everyone have their cameras on, so you
Yeah.
can see everyone. I find that helps. It helps people not interrupt each other as much. It helps people get that emotion they need, and because it gives you that sense that you are still together. When it's just because I've done it where it's all just boys. I've done the podcast style where it's all just boys.
yeah, we've done
over-
it together.
and it's
so-
just like that's when I didn't like it because
Mhm.
it's like I can't see who I'm playing with.
Mhm.
Like there's a lot to when you can see someone. Like,
another really
like
simple
or
thing.
like just be in
Go
the
ahead.
same room as them because
Yeah.
not everyone necessarily has eyesight or 100% eyesight, but just being able to feel like you're in the room with them. And
Mhm.
I feel like good headphones that kind of get rid of a lot of the background noise. Everyone's got a good connection, good mic.
Yeah.
If you can't do camera or there's a reason your vision is not at the same, if you have an impaired vision, like making sure you do what you need to do to feel like you're in the room. Sorry.
No, and another really simple thing we do is we use real dice. I know a lot
Yeah.
of streams use, like, we've been a part of things that use Roll20 dice, and it just doesn't feel the same. Like, I personally hate just Roll20
Yeah.
dice. I hate it. I hate virtual
I
dice.
do
I'm
too.
never
I
using
hate
them
it.
again. I hate it.
And it helps. It does help though. It's
Yeah.
like when I'm saying do what you need to do to feel like you're at the table. I
Yeah.
roll dice. I get one of my D&D mugs out.
Oh yeah, it's dice
I'll,
are
like,
huge for me. Yeah.
Or I'll do props because that helps me out.
Mhm.
But like also Ethernet. Sam brought up Ethernet, motherfucker, because just wire that shit. But like,
Yeah.
if you here's the thing, I say roll actual dice. If that's what you want to do, roll actual dice because I love it. I spent all this money on dice. Let me use
I
it.
might as well use them. All right, let's
But
take another
you-
question from Twitter.
Well, hold on. Well, I was getting
ahead.
to one more thing though,
Okay.
because like some people might be like, well, what about people who cheat? Here's my thing: if you
Oh.
think someone's gonna fucking cheat, you shouldn't be playing with them.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be fucking streaming with them.
All right, ready? Next question is from Kintotropic on Twitter. Sorry, I butchered that. How do you maintain pacing in a live production without the benefit of editing? It's one thing to let players go through the motions that are important to them, and another to keep it interesting for viewers. Couldn't have said it better myself. That is very true.
Yeah.
I think that pacing for me when we started this stream was a weak point, and I like to think that I've gotten a little bit better at it lately. One thing that we kind of do is when we can see that our players are just spinning the wheels, we just move them along. It's again, that's comfortability with your crew, your cast, and just knowing when nothing else good is going to come from this scene and just interjecting. It might seem rude in the moment, but there was a scene a few weeks ago where King Jax learned Common, and it was a great scene for like half an hour, and then I let it spin for like 40 minutes, and Kate, one of our players, was like, I'm so surprised you let us do that long. And I'm like, yeah, me too. so good things come from the scene, but at a certain point you're like, okay, we got to move it on.
and I think good pacing, knowing how to pace a session, and just
Yeah.
also the thing is I'm gonna say it. Fuck your spoilers. Talk
Yeah.
with your party. Say before the game. I do this. I check in every week before we play. I'll put it
Mm-hmm.
into the Discord. I'll be like, is there anything you want to do this week? Here's what I have planned.
Yeah, and I think that another thing that I don't disagree with you. I don't really do that for off-streamed games because I
I'm saying
like
for
that.
on stream.
Yeah, but on stream, I think you're putting on a production almost. So if the
Mhm.
cast knows the spoilers, it's not as big a deal because the audience is like who you want to hit with like the big reveals, right? So yes, you also want to make it fun for your players, but if you have to give them a minor spoiler to make it even more fun for the audience, I think that's okay.
And this goes back to also just proficiency with the system really helps.
Mhm.
Not sitting there humming and hawing over a rule, being able to make quick decisions on rulings. I hate to say it, digital tools are a huge asset.
Yeah.
D&D Beyond, I can go look up a spell that I don't know what it does exactly. I can do that in like a matter of 2 seconds.
Yeah.
And also just knowing what your character does, planning your turn ahead of time.
That's huge. Yeah.
Being able, like, I'm not saying rush through combat. I'm not saying, because you do, Matthew Foreman said in his video that something is like, you want to slow down, make sure you're doing everything right, you're communicating everything properly. Do that, yes. But try to avoid the rules arguments, make quick rulings, and people just know what your characters do, know what your stuff does, because no one wants to sit there and watch someone figure out how Fireball works.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, Matt's point was great. It'd like to take your time in combat, and I watched that whole video and I was, you know, absolutely enthralled by it. But one thing is to kind of help you not have to take your time as much is actually focus on combat when it's not your turn. And when I used to play offline games, my players would be on their phones during combat. I'd be like, hey, what's your name? It's your turn. And they'd be like, oh, well, what's going on? Like, can you reiterate the last 2 turns? Obviously, all of our players have better etiquette than that.
Yes.
But the entire time, even last night in Curse of Booty Island, I was playing a very simple character. I was a fighter with a bow. I had 2 attacks per turn. That's all I did, basically. Even with that simple ass character, I was still thinking the whole time, like, okay, this changed now. What does that mean for my character?
Yes.
So instead of just paying attention and enjoying the game, you should always be planning in your head, and that'll make it so you can take your time on the important things, and your turn still didn't take up that much time, and we can move forward. And the audience doesn't want to see it, you know. Like they don't want to see the Fireball ruling, like you said. Like the audience probably knows Fireball better than we do. So.
And that's the thing too. Don't be afraid to like go loose with the rules. If you get someone who wants the rules lawyer in the audience, I'm running the game. Don't worry about it. You know. Or thanks for letting me know. And you know, another thing is, CB brings up a good point. If you have to look something up, it's gonna happen. If you have to stop and pause for a second, keep role playing in combat. Keep that role play up. Ask a character, hey, what's your character? What's going through your character's mind right now? What are they thinking? You know, if you can talk and read at the same time, be like, you know, the monster's staring you down, the saliva dripping out of its mouth, snarling at you, and stuff like that. Even if it might even like out of context conversation, you know, like sometimes people want to say stuff out of character. That's a bad time to do it.
We got one more question if we want to move to that.
Yeah, sure. Let's move to the last Twitter question.
This is from Rio Red Wings 2 on Twitter. They say, how on earth do you handle the chaos that generally comes with a TTRPG session when it's a streamed game? Like, you can pause in a home game whenever you need to, but you can't do that with an audience and limited time slot. That's true. How do I handle the chaos? I think that Alex does an even better job than I do at this, is knowing your monster's stat blocks really well. So
because I make them all.
Yes. So knowing their turn before, before that happens. So yeah, you know, last night Alex ran like 5 different stat blocks, but I'm sure that he spent time memorizing them all. So if you're gonna, you know, have multiple monsters in a fight and make it more dynamic, which I highly recommend you do that, obviously, like we talked about, just make sure that you actually give it a read. Don't just say, okay, I'm going to give them 5 vampire spawn, a vampire, and like a lich. You know, like don't, and then be like, oh, I'll read the stat blocks while we're going. Make sure you have almost like a list that you keep of what moves they're going to do in the succession. I actually sometimes sit down and turn by turn I'll be like, okay, vampire is going to take a multi-attack, then he's going to use whatever ability next, even though, you know, he might have to react to his surroundings. Just having that list right there can help the stream move along.
And not just the list, but also just having those stat blocks easy to find, easy to access. Again, it's like kind of like back to the proficiency with the system. And it's like, if you want to design dynamic encounters, you have to be up in that encounter. You need to know what's going on with it. You need to know what works where and who does what, because that's how you're going to be able to design the dynamic encounter. But like, to go outside of this encounter design when it comes to pacing, to answer the question more at large, handling the chaos, being organized. I have a thing of notes in front of me, having some level of organization, knowing where to find your stat blocks, find stuff. I tend to manage chat more when players are role playing away. That's when I jump in the chat and check out what's going on there and go and check all their stuff, or maybe go back to my notes and review stuff I'm looking for. So kind of being one step ahead of the next thing that's going to happen.
Exactly. And a lot of the chaos can sometimes come from your players too, as much as we love them. So having them be the master of their own sheets, like I don't always fact check them on spells that they want to use, and that they're the master of that's their domain. So the chaos can definitely be cut down by just trusting your players know what the heck they're talking about, and most of them do.
And the thing is like, I'm not going to sit there and if they're like confidently saying this is what happens, blah blah blah, I'm not going to question that, bro.
No.
Like unless it's a question, unless they're like, I don't really know, I'm not going to really read along with them. Trust your players, but also know that your players are also going to be the ones that can get you knocked off track. They can cause a lot of that chaos for you.
Yeah.
Again, kind of talking ahead of time. Hey, here's what I've got planned. It's okay if they go off the rails. It's fine. But at least they know, okay, but we need to circle back here. No, like also just sometimes softly letting your players know. You can even do it like in character, have an NPC pop in, like when y'all were doing crew counseling and the party was sitting around having this big discussion. And when I felt like they were starting to talk in circles or we were losing focus, I'd have an NPC come in and be like, y'all need anything? Something like that.
Yeah, I do that a lot too. I mean, I run a lot of my game through NPCs, honestly, and I think that they're a really good tool to use. Not only making that little meme NPC that the audience loves and they laugh at them, but also using the way you used Gregor in that scenario. It's like, hey, can I talk to you for a little bit, and kind of interrupting that scene when it was a good time. You let us get through all the meat of the discussion that we wanted to, but then when we were like, okay, what do we do next, you kind of moved it along. So that was really good.
And don't look at it like you don't want to look at it as I'm stopping my players from doing what they want. Your players will get it if they're good players. I call it nudging. I call it pushing them in the direction we need to get going. If they're having a big, deep, meaningful scene, that's fine. If they're having a really good RP scene, it feels like you're going somewhere, they're moving stuff forward. But if you feel like progression isn't going forward and they're talking in circles, making jokes, that's when you give them the nudge. Okay, let's move this forward. Let's move forward, and also knowing when to nudge yourself too.
Yeah. And Sam just said in chat, it's also nice to RP with the DM. And that's a great point because, for the crew counseling session, the infamous, we role played for a good 2 hours without Alex saying like anything. And as much as, it was fun for us, I can imagine that, Alex also wanted to play D&D tonight. So it was also good to get one of his key NPCs in there to chat with us.
See, but then while they're doing that, while you're not doing anything, literally not really doing much, that's when you're going in and managing a lot of that chaos stuff. Double checking your notes, going through your stat blocks, interacting with chat.
Exactly. And this is kind of an off-topic thing, but along with that, when you're not doing anything, it's a great time if you're running tech to make sure everything's going okay.
Yes.
Because I mess up tech at least once a session, and it's whenever I'm not looking at my players, assume that I'm working on either a monster stat block, setting up the next map, or doing something with tech. So just being active and on top of things that whole 3 hours you play is really important.
And my final tip before we wrap things up here, because we got another event coming up. We didn't even get to touch on everything we want to talk about.
No, we'll do it again.
My final tip for managing all that chaos, and it's a really easy one, get a second monitor.
Oh, yeah.
Get another monitor, because I can have all my stat blocks open on one. I can have the Roll20 map on another. I can pop the camera here and learn how to manage your widgets in your windows and put them in good places. That's that organization. 2 monitors will help you with that, and just knowing where you're putting all your windows and stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you all for joining us. I think we're going to wrap up here on to our next event. Make sure you go ahead.
We're going to be starting the panel on intersectionality.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us. Our Twitter handles are above. If you want to tweet us and tell us we suck and we shouldn't be giving advice, please do so.
Do consider donating for CouchCon, for Doctors Without Borders. Check out the virtual vendor hall. Also, if you enjoy what we said as DMs and kind of want to see this in practice a little more, you can catch us on Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern time for either Steam Spell or Agora's Bells. Those are the campaigns we were referencing a lot.
Yep.
We have all kinds of other games we play in. We're not gonna keep you with that.
Nah, come on by on Wednesdays, 7 p.m. Eastern, and see one of us DM and the other play. We have a lot of things that we can learn from the community as well. So if you want to say more to us, recommend some things to us, hit us up on Twitter. Other than that, enjoy CouchCon.
Yeah, and if you have any more questions, jump in Discord and ask them away.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.